Welcome to this week's edition of Money Matters, because as you know, if you've ever seen me before, I deeply, truly believe that money does matter. It's not for the money itself, it's for the choices it gives. And one of our choices when we've got money is to be aware of the environment, is to be aware of global warming, is to be aware of plastics in the seas. And having wealth, having money, enables us to do something about it, other than shouting and screaming. So what I want to cover this week on Money Matters is Rishi Sunak and his, well, I'm losing count actually, of his U-turns on environmental policy. And I want to go under some of his U-turns on environmental policy, specifically to do with property and housing and property investment, as you probably expect me to do, and just look at some of the background as to why he's doing it. So where I want to start is the net zero. The UK says it's leading the world in terms of the commitment to net zero. It's actually a legal obligation. And by 2050, the intention is that the UK will be entirely carbon neutral. But rather than just say we're going to carry on doing whatever we're doing and then in 2049 we're going to completely throw everything in the air and 1 year later it'll be fine, quite sensibly, the government or the powers that be have said, well, we can't just do that, we have to have some milestones. So they've said things like, by 2030, it will be illegal in the UK to sell cars with petrol or diesel engines. They all need to be electric. Well, I don't think this has been very well thought through, and clearly neither does Rishi, because he just announced that, well, actually, it's not going to be the 2030 that was a legally binding government mandate is now 2035. So let's look closer to home. Let's look at property. And in particular, let's look at what he's just changed. Because what he's just changed is he said that, or the government said that, the energy performance certificate, and specifically for rented properties, the EPC goes from A, which is the best, down to G, which is the worst. So at the moment, in order to rent a property out, you have to have an EPC of at least an E. You can still own it, but if you specifically want to rent it out, it has to have an EPC of E. And the previous plan was that's going to move to a C. The various renters groups, renters themselves, were pleased about this, because if you get your home from an E, which is not good, to a C and you rent it, and the energy performance goes up, it gets better, then you need to spend less energy, which should mean less money to heat it and to light it and to, have hot water and all these sorts of things. Well, amongst the things that he did last time he reviewed all this, a week or 10 days ago, he chucked that in the bin as well. So the commitment to improve the energy efficiency of the UK's homes is out the window. There's no guidance at all about what's going to happen next with regard to EPCs. So let's just look underneath that and let's understand why he's done it. Well, the first chart I'd like to share with you is this one. So this is the net migration chart going back for the last few years. We've got 600,000 people arrived net in the UK, and that doesn't count natural population increase from people living longer, from babies being born. This is just people arriving, okay? Where they were going to live? Well, if you just arrived from, many of those people were probably displaced by, for example, things like the Ukraine war. So mad Putin invades a completely harmless, quiet country, causes all the people to flee in terror of their lives. They've got to live somewhere. And if you're arriving from a war zone, you're not typically in a position to be able to get a mortgage and buy a house, are you? You need to rent somewhere. And even if you arrived, as many do, because the NHS doesn't have enough people, doesn't have enough staff. So let's say you're a doctor of some sort that's just arrived from India because you're going to look after people in the NHS, and you're on £600 a day, which is, say, £3,000 a week, which is, say, £150,000 a year. Well, you're going to have to live in the UK for 3 years to build up a credit history, otherwise you can't get a mortgage. So yes, you could in theory buy a house, but you'd have to buy it for cash. So looking at all these pressures, and I could go on but I won't, you get the picture I'm sure, there's more and more people than ever before as a result of net migration, supporting the NHS, the birth rate and all sorts of other things that need a house to rent. So now let's look at the available rental properties in the private sector. And you can forget the public sector because they haven't built any houses essentially for about the last 30 years now. Mrs. Thatcher put an end to that. She sold them all off. And the public sector, yes, there's some properties left, but they're not growing anymore. They're not building anymore. So it's all about the private sector. So the private sector since 2016, look at this. This is the reduction in private properties available to rent since 2016. So in the last 6-7 years, they've gone down. So the amount of properties, so boom, demand has exploded. All these people arriving that need properties to rent. What's happened? Over 300 plus thousand properties have left the private rental sector. Why? What's the relevance of 2016? Well, 2016 is when George Osborne, stood up with his dispatch box and said, I'm going to change all these rules, private landlords have got it far too good, and he introduced Section 24. And he started killing people with essentially double taxation. On top of that, all these various changes were going through, and things like to move your EPC from an E to a C, it was assumed that, oh yeah, the rich landlords can pay that. Well, the average landlord in the UK, I've got to tell you, there's 2.6 million residential landlords in the UK. The average one makes £15,000 a year before tax. And to move an EPC, an energy performance certificate, from an E to a C costs a lot of money. Could be tens of thousands of pounds. So you might have to spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years profits in order to move the energy performance from here to here so that your tenant saves money. Not you, your tenant saves money. So what have a load of people done? They've sold them. Sold them. So what does Rishi now do? He's gone, oh my God, we've got all these people, we've got nowhere to put them, all these rented houses are going down. Look at this third chart, housing benefits. So because the government has created this, they've made their bed and now they're lying in it. The government created this problem, they didn't need to. Industry bodies, myself, various other people in the industry have been saying, this isn't the right thing to do. They've created this problem. Rental supply gone down and down and down due to tax and the way in which landlords have been treated like dogs over the last 6-7 years. And now the Prime Minister thinks, oh, I actually need your help, private sector. And so he started to throw us a few bones. And one of the bones he's thrown us is, well, actually, you no longer have to improve your energy efficiency from an E to a C. So I don't actually think this has got anything to do with his desire to save the planet, reduce emissions or anything else. It's just a practical realization. If he doesn't do it, there's going to be nowhere for people to live. So what does that mean for you and me, for landlords? Well, broadly, from a financial perspective, it's good news. My feel for this is that all the things that government were previously doing to us, increased tax, more regulation, compulsory this, landlord registration, and all the other things I could go on for hours about. This is the first sign that I've seen in many years that they're backing off. They've seen rents skyrocketing. The average rent in the UK went up by 10.6% in 2022. This year, I think it's going to be 15%. So when rents have gone up by 25% in 2 years and the supply's gone down and the demand's gone up, the number of people's gone up, what else is the government going to do? They're going to start building houses again? Well, with what? They ain't got any money. They're bankrupt. The total government income, again, see other videos, is about 750 million. Total expenditure, total expenditure is 300 billion more than that. National debt is going up and up and up. Do you know his biggest problem? His biggest problem is he's got a general election coming, probably next year, possibly January 2025. So within the next 15 months, he's got to have a general election, which means he's got to get the interest rates down, which means he's got to get people on side. And one of the ways in which people get on side is they've got somewhere to live. So this is not about his environmental agenda. This is naked politics and electioneering. The only good news in this whole mess is it may, just may, benefit the private rental sector in the UK medium term, which I would be happy about. But anyway, something I'm certain about is that interest rates are be on their way down a year from today, because there's a general election coming. All right, that's this week's edition of Money Matters. I, like you, I'm sure, want to save the planet. You go into any place, anywhere and say, sir, madam, would you like to save the planet? The answer you're going to get is yes. The supplementary question, sir, madam, would you like to pay for it? The answer you're going to get is no. That is the fundamental problem he's grappling with. Everybody wants to save the penguins and the polar bears. Nobody wants to put their pennies in to make it possible. That's a lot of P's, isn't it? That's called alliteration, by the way. Anyway, before I ramble on too much, I'm out of here. You're wonderful. I'm Paul. See you next time.